Hi students, this week we're going to talk about validating our data in ASP.NET Core MVC. So thus far we've already worked with uh, getting things from our database and being able to put those things on our web pages, building some scaffolding around the views and the models that we send to our views from the controller, building some view models. But now what we want to do is how do we validate that data? How do we make sure that data is in the correct format that we need it to be in for that to then flow into our database without error? So there's a couple different ways we can do it. One is server-side validation, which is going to be the main component in how we validate data, because we're going to bind that model back to the view. And then once we bind that model back to the controller, what we're going to do is validate to ensure that data is correct. There's also some things we can do with jQuery for client-side validation, where essentially the client has some JavaScript sitting on the client, so it downloads that JavaScript, and it has some rules and tells the JavaScript exactly how it should be validated. You can use it in tandem to where the client will validate it, and then once the client validates it, you bind the model and then you send it back to the controller, and then the controller again validates it. But as we'll see, sometimes it provides for not a great user experience, which the book will validate and the book tells us. So let me go to the next slide here. I'm not going to spend too much time on the PowerPoint. We're going to describe the default data validation provided by model binding. So model binding already gives us a little bit of default validation. We'll find it when we go and do the model state.isValid property that is attached to our controller. We'll see that we can make sure that we only do certain methods or certain processes only if the model is valid. And then we're also going to put some attributes on our model to ensure that the data is properly validated before we put it in our database. So the default model binding essentially just makes sure that ints are ints, decimals are decimals, dates are dates, strings are strings. It doesn't do any hardcore validation like if the text box is required, or if the date is a proper date, or anything like that, or if it's within a certain range. Some of those things are left out of the data validation by default. So here's a simple movie class. Here's some things we'll have in our view to provide for the validation, which we'll find is already by default within the scaffolding. So we have our movie model here, and then we have a division at the top of our form that essentially is meant to validate our data. And you can see that we have ASP validation summary of all. And then for each thing, such as ASP for the name or the rating, we'll have certain attributes on those on the model to see if it passes the validation or not. And then you can see we have an if statement. If the model state is valid, then we want to maybe add the movie to our database and then redirect to our movie list, which we'll do in my demonstration. You can see here some default here's some default validation that it does. So the rating can be 1 through 5. They type in the number 4 as a word, so it gives the value 4 is not valid for rating. So that's just some of the default stuff that comes out of the box. But let's say they put in like a number 6, even though the rating can only be 1 through 5. The default validation isn't going to really catch that because it is a valid integer. It just might not be the rating that we want, such as in this label. Here's some common data attributes for validation that we'll end up using. You see that we have required. So essentially, is this required for submission? Maybe it's not required, so we won't put this attribute on it. There's also a range that it could be in. So we already saw that. We already saw the range of, let's say, the rating of 1 through 5. I went back. A rating of, say, 1 through 5, so we could put 1 and 5 here of min and max. The length a string could be, we could use regular expressions, and then we can also force something to be displayed in a certain way. So you can see that this rating of 1 through 5, so they probably have a display attribute on it to change how it's displayed on the form. I don't see anything in the PowerPoint, but I'm sure that's what they did. So you can see that the name of the movie was required. The name of the movie cannot be any longer than 30, and the range of the rating can only be 1 through 5. And there's what it looks like when it doesn't pass validation. So they probably put a movie length in that was too long. They put a -1, so it gives you some error messages, and you don't really have to configure the error messages. You can provide a specific error message, but some of them are actually pretty good just right out of the box without needing to do much changing to them. So you see here, here's the required attribute, but we're changing the error message so we can pass in as a parameter to this required attribute class exactly what we want the error message to be. Password. You can see they have a display, so the name is confirmed password instead of just password. You can set a compare to, so you can compare two different properties to one another. We already talked about string length, required error message. You can have a range of date time. So we can do a lot of things to validate our model. So now that we've talked about model validation, let me go ahead and go back and exit this PowerPoint presentation. Let me go to my project. Let's go ahead. So here's my project. I believe I already have it up, and now I don't have it up in Visual Studio Code. So let me go ahead and open with code. I'm probably going to jump back and forth between Visual Studio and VS Code just because I want to leverage some of the built-in functionality that Visual Studio offers, such as scaffolding and whatnot that I don't have in VS Code. So the first thing I want to do is, I think this might be behind in my Git version. There's a couple different things I can do. I can say Git status, and since I opened up this project inside of the Git folder, it should be able to see that this has a Git folder attached to it from where I opened it. So if I do a control click, it should open up this folder here. Anyways, here's the Git folder inside of the File Explorer, so it should be able to get the status of my current situation in Git. So let me go ahead and Git status. And you can see that my branch is behind by 2 commits. So I probably committed on my laptop or something. I'm on my tablet currently. So what I can do is use git pull, or I can use my Git extension to essentially pull. So you can see that I'm 2 commits behind. I can actually pull from here. Using this user interface, you can tell what all the commits were. I did some auto mapper stuff and a website update. Or I could also pull from the command line. So I'm going to go ahead and git pull. Sometimes the command line wants some other parameters, but it looks like it was able to do it without any help. Alright, so let's go ahead and go back to my project. Okay, it looks like I have what I wanted now. So I was able to fetch my recent commits from Git, so now my project should be up to date. Let me go ahead and go back to File Explorer, and I'm going to open my solution here in Visual Studio. So I'm going to have it open in both places, but if I make a change in one place, it's looking at the same file system, so it'll make the changes in both places. Alright, so now I have my Visual Studio open. What I'm going to end up wanting to do is I'm going to end up adding a button, and I'm going to add some more items to my types. And I'm going to validate that those are correct. and validate that they typed in the correct information before I submit it to my database. So let's go ahead and try running this first to make sure it builds and runs. Just got latest, so there might be some changes that it had to build again, build some projects. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so I have a link to my basic items here. I'm going to end up having a link to my another table that I'm looking at to show some other items as well. So what I'm going to do is go back to VS Code. Let's close some stuff down. Let's go to my views. I'm going to end up adding another anchor tag here. So I have an anchor for this. Let me go ahead and put this in a div because I'm actually going to want to not have these stack right next to each other here. So let's go ahead and reformat it. Oops. Let's go ahead and copy this and paste it below and change. The controller can stay the same. Let's have the action be normal. That's going to be normal items. Let's say show normal Diablo 2 items. Let me go ahead and stop running it. So now that I've done that, that's fine. I'll need a controller action for normal, so I'm going to have a get action for my normal items. Let's go back to my controllers, my items controller, and that's an unused using statement. Let me get rid of that. So there's basic type add. Let's just go ahead and put it at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and say HTTP get, and it's going to be public I action result normal. Okay, so I have that. Let's go ahead and return a view so I get rid of the error message. And then once I return the view, I will end up needing to create a view. So what I'm going to want to do is have another view model. So let's go ahead and create a view model for our view. Let's go ahead and say new file, normal items view model .cs. Want to give it a namespace of com.diablo2.models.viewModels. Let's give it public class normal items view model. And this should simply be a list of Diablo 2 items. Let's go ahead and make it public. It's also going to want the collections. Let's wait for a second. Give it a getter and a setter. Then I'm going to have to tell it that I want my generic list collection. And this might be item with one S. It's probably why it's not seeing it. Yep, there it is. Then I want my Diablo 2 item from my entities. Okay, so that's looking fine. So in my items controller, what I want to do is make a new view model and then pass that view model to my view. So let's go and say var view model equals new normal items view model. And then I have Diablo 2 items, and that's going to be equal to getting those Diablo 2 items from my database. So I want to get all items and cast it to a list since that's the type on my view model. And what is database entities? Did I use the wrong ones here? Yeah, I must have used the wrong namespace. So let's go back to my view model. I don't want database entities. I want that. So that should fix my issue back here now, and it does. Let's go ahead and send that view model to the view. Okay, so now I need a view. So now that's when I'm going to leverage actual Visual Studio for some scaffolding. No, I don't want to install. So if I go to the controllers, you can see that I have some changes already. It's complaining about too many applications open. So let me see if I can close some stuff here. Okay, so let me try to leverage. Let's go to Views, Items. Let's right click, add a view. Let's go ahead and use a razor view. Click Add. The view name is going to be normal. Then I'm going to want to add, not create. Let's go ahead and list it out. And I'm going to be using a normal items view model. I don't know if I want to choose this or not. Since I am listing it out, I don't know if it's going to be smart enough to know there's a list in there. Let's try it out. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Where was the normal items view model? Okay. Let's go ahead and add it and see what it does. I'm actually interested to see what this does. Worst case, we'll just delete our view and go the route that I wanted to go to begin with. Or if this works, we'll just move on. Yeah, it doesn't look like this did what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to for each through all of my items in my view model, but it doesn't look like it did it. So let's go ahead and delete. Let's go ahead and, what's this? Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and delete this normal CSHTML view. And let's go ahead and add the view back in. Let's add a view. Go ahead and double click razor view. Let's say normal. And instead of the view model, we're still going to end up using the view model. Let me go ahead and still put list. And the model class will just be, let's see here. Why am I not seeing what I want? Template is list. Okay, I think what I'm looking for here is my Diablo 2 entities, Diablo 2 item, and since I have it in a list, it should know to list it out as is. So let's go ahead and try this out and see if this scaffolds it the way I want it to. Alright, let's go ahead and get rid of some real estate here, and it looks like it did what I wanted it to do. So you see we have an IEnumerable now of Diablo 2 items, which is what we have in our view model class, but it doesn't transfer over exactly as I would like it to. So we see that we have in our view models folder our normal items view model, and that's a list of Diablo 2 items, but it's still wrapped in this view model. So what I want to do is go here and go ahead and copy this. Okay. And when I copy that, I'm going to go ahead and paste it up here in my model. So it's scaffolded out for me everything I wanted. It's just using the wrong view model. So you notice when I change this and save it, some of this stuff's going to break. So what I need to do is first I want to say in model dot Diablo 2 items. And that should fix everything down here. Because my Diablo 2 items has a model item in it for each Diablo 2 item. So what I need to fix is this display for up here that displays all of their labels. So I need model.diablo2 items dot, and since Diablo 2 items is a list, I'm going to go ahead and just pick the first one. So first or default dot ID. So I'm just going to get the first Diablo 2 item and make the labels based off of that since they're all the same. Looks like I copied the period as well, so I'm going to go back and delete an extra period in these. Go ahead and click Save, and that now works with my scaffolding. Okay, now that we have this, now that I have all of my items listed, you can see it created an action for me at the top called Create. I'm going to actually use that and create another page to add in a new item to my list. So let's go ahead and go to my items folder again. Go ahead and click Add a View. And I'm going to call it Create since that's the action name. I'm going to use the Create scaffold and I'm going to create my Entities Diablo 2 item. Go ahead and click Add. This one should scaffold correctly since I'm not changing the view model at the top. So once this scaffolds out, I should be pretty much done there. Except for ID, I'm not going to use ID, so let me go ahead and get rid of that. You can see we already have the validation summary here, so that's good. So here's the normal CSHTML. I'm going to end up needing to go back to the controller and add in a create method for me to go to. Let's go back to my controller, items controller, and I have a view. So let's go ahead and do an HTTP GET. And let's say public I action result. And it's going to be create. So once we do create, we're going to say var model equals new entities.diablo2 item. And then we're going to go ahead and return our view with a blank model in it. Okay, and lastly, let's go ahead and say HTTP post, because we're going to want a post method to take in our model once it's filled out. So let's go ahead and say this is going to take in a redirect to action result. Let's go ahead and make it public. It'll then be called create, and it's going to take in our Diablo 2 model. So again, entities dot Diablo 2 item. Go ahead and call it Diablo 2 item. And then let's go ahead and return redirect to action. So I'm going to go ahead and redirect to this action to display our list again once we add an item to it. So the first thing we'll need to do is there's going to be some code to add the item to our database. And that's going to be if our model state is valid. So that's going to say if model state dot is valid. That's when we're going to want to add the code to our database. And I believe this is a property and not a method. Yep. So if the model state's valid, we'll go ahead and add the item to our database. And either way, whether it works or not, we'll go ahead and redirect to normal our normal list for now. So let's go ahead and add some properties, add some attributes to make sure our model is correctly filled out. So let's go to our entities. Okay, so here is our entities. Let's go ahead and, how's Visual Studio Code looking? And here's our models, views, entities, Diablo 2 item. Let's say the name is required, but I might not have the correct Alright, I don't have the package installed for my data annotation, so I'm actually going to go back to Visual Studio. It gives me a little help here for if it can't find the package, where Visual Studio Code really doesn't provide a lot of help. So this will actually tell me, would you like me to install the package System Component Model Annotations? So I'm going to go ahead and click Yes, I do. Find and install the latest version. And you can see it goes out and installs the latest version and updates my CS project file. Now, if you already knew that this was inside of the namespace System Component Model Data Annotations, you could go out and in VS Code inside of your terminal and go out and install that into your project file. But Visual Studio, if it's a popular enough package, NuGet package, it'll give you a hint. Are you missing, say, this package? And it'll go out and find it for you. Let's go ahead and put a range. Let's go ahead and put an attribute range. You can see it tries to give you some hints, double minimum, double maximum. So let's go ahead and say 1 to 250, say. What does it not like about that? 1 second here. Alright, range 1 to 250. That should be fine. Yeah, I don't think that this is saved over here. Yeah, I think Visual Studio is kind of confused right now. Now let's overwrite. Let's go ahead and using data annotations. Okay, there it went. So I was doing work in Visual Studio and VS Code, and VS Code was kind of confused because it didn't know where this was at because I never put it in there, and that's understandable. So let's go ahead and put in a range for the max damage as well. Let's say the range for the max damage is anywhere from 15 to 500. We can also do some validation around the dates and whatnot. We'll just leave it off for now. Let's put a string length on the description maybe. Let's put a required attribute on the description. Let's go ahead and put a string length of say 100. So it can't be any longer than 100. Alright, now that we have all of our model validated, or the validation attributes on it, let's go and tie everything together and see if it works. What error am I getting? Is my CS proj updated? I think it might have put it. Where did it put it? Where's my CS proj? Yeah, I never put it here. Let me go to my project file from my main application. Yeah, let's go back to Visual Studio. I must have put it. Yeah, this thing's totally confused right now. If I go to my dependencies, let's go and try installing it again. That's not what I want. Let me go back. Let's see here. Alright, this doesn't exist, but it definitely does. Let's try to go to my terminal and install it. So let's copy this. Go ahead and copy. Go to my terminal. Let's say .NET add to, let's say com, where am I at first? Let's do .entities with a backslash, my CS proj file. Let's add the package system component data annotations. Alright, looks like I was unable to find it. What does it not like here? Let me close out of this. Alright, back to Visual Studio. Let's close Visual Studio too. Save. Since I had two things open, it just might need a good old restart. Let's go back to where my project is. And source, git. Let's go ahead and open with code. Let's go and try to run it now. Looks like it might be fine now. Alright. If all else fails, just close everything and reopen it. Alright, so here are my normal Diablo 2 items. So it should show a list coming from my database. Unless I mess something up here. Okay, so here's my list. Looks like the ID isn't quite correct. But anyways, let's go ahead and create new. And then you can see when we create new, it allows us text boxes for all these. let's go and say, what name do I want for a new item? Let's go back to list. Oh, looks like I never changed that. Okay. Item slash normal. All right, let's go ahead and create new. Let's say the name is Zweihander. A two-handed sword. The item type ID is 1. Let's say the minimum damage is 0. And you can see that it automatically gives us some data validation here. Let's say the max damage is 1000. And when I click away, you can see that I now have some data validation. You can see if I leave this blank that the name field is required, and if I go ahead and copy and paste this a bunch of times, it should eventually tell me that it can't be that long. Looks like it might be outside of the normal range of a text box, is why it won't show that error message. I think I said this can be 100 characters, and the text box probably doesn't allow 100 characters. I might need for the description, I might need to put a list box or something here. So let's go ahead and say a two-handed sword. Okay, the minimum damage is, let's say, 15. The max damage is 25. Let's say I added it today. Yeah, that's fine. Today. And let's go back to my controller here. So here's where I'm going to add it to my database. Let's go ahead and say create. Here's my item, and it should have got model bound back over. Here's my description, the date modified. It looks like my item type is null for some reason. Okay, it looks like the item type ID came over though, which is really what I wanted. Min max damage, all is filled out. Let's go ahead and see if it goes into my model state is valid method. Let's go ahead and say F10. If the model state is valid, and it goes into it, so the model state must have been valid, but I don't have any code yet to add it to my database. So let's go ahead and add that. Let's go back. Where's my database? Here's my database. I probably also need to add it to my interface as well. So my interface is my Diablo 2 repository. Let's go ahead and say void add normal item. And it's going to be I'm already using my entities, so let's just say Diablo 2 item. Okay, so since I made that interface, I want to go ahead and implement the contract to my repository. So let's scroll to the top. Let's go ahead and control period. Implement that one method that I don't have implemented quite yet. And it should now have a not implemented exception. And let's go ahead and db context dot Diablo 2 items dot add new Diablo 2 item from my database entities, because it's not going to want to use the other one. And I will need to map everything over to my database entity. So I can do this a couple different ways. I could use AutoMapper, which I'll probably end up refactoring it to do. I might make another video on using AutoMapper. But until then, let's go ahead and say the name equals Diablo2 item dot name. The min damage equals dot min damage, max damage. What else do we have? A description. Date added equals, what is date added? Is that a date time? Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and say dot date added, date modified. What else do I have? I did the description. Let's go ahead and click into it, make sure I'm not missing anything. I have an item type ID and hands. I'm not sure if hands is required in the database or not. I guess we're about to find out if it throws an exception. Item type ID. All right, let's try that out. So I'll probably need to go back to the controller and call it. So let's go ahead and say repo.addNormalItem and pass it our Diablo2 item. And let's try to run it again. Now I could catch some result here, maybe if it does throw an exception, and display that result to the user. But just for a quick sanity check to see if it works or not, let's go ahead and create new. Let's go ahead and create that two-hander sword. A two-handed sword. I must not have the number of hands the weapon is on here. So I might need to add that or it's going to fail. So I think I said 5 to 15 maybe. Let's go ahead and say it was added today. And let's click create. Let's go ahead and get rid of this and continue. And it added two-handed sword. I'm guessing it didn't work. Wonder if I just ate the exception because I didn't put it in a try catch. So let's go ahead and try, let's wrap this in a try catch to see if it's throwing an exception. I might not be fixing the number of hands. Return exception. So let's go, I'm going to set a breakpoint on the exception. And let's try to run it again. Let's show our items. Create new. Let's go ahead and use the browser here to help me out a little bit. Create. Doesn't look like it ran into an exception. Let's go ahead and set a breakpoint here as well. Try to do it again. I just don't believe this is working if it's not throwing an exception. Alright, if the model state is valid, oh, you know what? I might not be saving my changes to the context. That's F11. There, I'm adding it to the database. Yeah, I don't think I'm doing a context.save changes. Let's do that. Alright, let's try running it again now. Let's go ahead and again show the items. Let's create a new one. Click create. Do I still have a breakpoint there? I must not, and it looks like it added. So now I have a two-handed sword down here. So I never saved the changes to my context. I'm really interested with this hands column. It must not be required in my database. Let's go to tables, Diablo 2 items, select top 1,000 rows. So I have, yeah, I didn't insert one here, so it must not be required, or I must just put in a 0 if it's sent null. So that would be something I would need to fix for sure. But other than that, so now we've seen how model validation works in ASP.NET Core. We've done some more scaffolding with our details view. It's still not perfect, but we can do some more work around why this ID isn't coming over. And a few other things, such as putting the hands on my model and inserting the number of hands that is required to wield the weapon inside my data table. But for the most part, it looks like everything is working. So I hope this explains a little bit better how model validation works and how we can use our attributes and our data annotations to figure out exactly what's required and show those error messages on our forms. So as always, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out, and I'll see you guys in the next video.